So welcome back, everyone. I hope you enjoyed the first half of this evening and our great discussion afterwards. It's now my pleasure to introduce the speakers for the second half. So kicking us off is Jen Pepper, who is studying for an MFA in Communication Design at Kutztown University of Pennsylvania, where her research has looked into the intersections of feminism and design. And tonight, Jen will discuss whether design education is failing women designers. So over to you, Jen.
Thank you. So again, I'm Jen Pepper. I'm super excited to be here today. I've been working as a designer for almost 20 years. In 2018, I took the plunge and enrolled at Kutztown University in their MFA design program. And it was there that I really found myself exploring the role of women in design, both in our past and our present. And while researching for my thesis project and my thesis paper, I found that while obviously women designers from our past and current contemporary women are slowly gaining more recognition in our field, design students are still being underserved in our classroom, especially women. Can I have the next slide, please? Thank you. In US universities, women are earning more design degrees than their male peers. In 2019, the Rhode Island School of Design awarded 65% of their design degrees to women, and the trend was similar along other top design schools. Savannah College of Art and Design's graduating class was 68% women. Pratt was 71% women. And it's estimated that in the US, women are earning 75% of bachelor degrees awarded in graphic design programs. Yet on average, the faculty of design programs at US universities is only made up of 25% women. And as we all know, representation does matter. In fact, women in faculty positions, they serve as role models for students, and strong role models have been shown to be vital to the aspirations and the self-esteem of women students. When women have higher levels of self-esteem, it not only improves their grades, but it improves their competence, their personal motivation, their levels of achievement, and their relationships with others. In a 1985 study by Lucia Gilbert, student-faculty relationships were analyzed to determine whether or not women and men had differing views on role models. Of the students studied, 75% of them chose role models of their same sex, regardless of the number of same-sex role models available for them to choose from in their departments. Women students in that survey also said that the relationships they have with women faculty members are more meaningful to them and more impactful to them than those that they had with male faculty. Women students have also been shown to avoid male-dominated fields, which is why it's so important for them to see women in all areas of design, both in academia and of course at professional levels. A 2005 study by Eric Bettner and Bridget Terry Long showed that women students were more likely to major in STEM fields when they were assigned a woman professor. There's no evidence to suggest that this would differ in design disciplines, especially as it relates to emerging media and technology. With women making up the majority of students in our design programs, it's really vital that universities do more to hire faculty that reflect the student population. It makes their programs more attractive to prospective students. It helps foster the ambitions of young women who are pursuing a career in design. Could I have the next slide, please? Another way, we touched on this with some of the other presenters, another way women are being underserved in our classrooms is in design history curriculum. There's been such a focus on design heroes, this individual monolithic designer whose work has been deemed culturally significant. But historically, white men have been the ones in charge of declaring these designers worthy of studying. Many courses require students to purchase the textbook, Meg's History of Graphic Design. It's noted as the unrivaled comprehensive reference tool for graphic designers and students. That's the book's words, not mine. The first edition was published in 1983. It mentioned 15 women. It reproduced the work of 9. It It was made up of 514 pages. The book was revised in 1992. We went from 15 women to 31 women. 23 of them had their work showcased in the book. The latest edition of Meg's, it was published in 2016. It increased the number of work by women, which is visually represented, from 23 to 48. Of course, it is better than the original version in 1983, but I mean, it pales in comparison to the hundreds of male designers included in the 704-page book. Unfortunately, other design history volumes don't fare much better. Alan Wheel's pocket-sized Graphic Design: A History, published in 2003, it mentions a man named Harry Voltaire. In 1847, he refined a process that made paper rolls more affordable. He is mentioned in this book by name, yet there's no mention of Augusta Lewis, who founded the Women's Typographic Union in 1868, or Agnes B. Peterson, who started the Women's Cooperative Printing Union in 1869. They were all working in the 1800s, but only that man is mentioned. In fact, only a handful of women are mentioned in this volume at all, and even fewer have their work reproduced for study. Another book, Richard Hollis's Graphic Design and Concise History, published in 2001. The revised edition boasts that it contains over 800 examples of graphic design reproduced in its 232 pages, 800 examples. 19 of them feature women, and it only features work by 13 different women. When these books are suggested and even required reading in design classrooms and design courses, are universities and professors complicit in telling women that their contributions to the field of design don't matter as much as men? They're not as relevant. If these books that feature men and women together fail to highlight women, then perhaps other books should be added to design curriculum. Like Jill Bryan's Dazzling Women Designers, Libby Sellers' Women of Design, Ellen Lupton, if you've not read this book yet, came out this year or last year. It's called Extra Bold, a feminist, inclusive, anti-racist, non-binary field guide for graphic designers. It talks about history, but it also investigates how designers can take feminist thought into consideration when designing for diverse audiences. Could I have my next slide, please? Thank you. Well, clearly representation is an important issue that I could discuss further. I wanted to make sure to mention another issue that faces all women, especially women designers, and of course, that's the wage gap. In the US, the wage gap across all industries is 83%. In graphic design, women fare a little better, but they're still making only 92% of what their male peers do. University and design educators can help women close this gap by focusing on professional preparation beyond portfolio development. Of course, we all know having a polished, awesome portfolio, is great for graduation. But soft skills like resume writing, interview practice, and working with creative teams can also be incorporated into senior portfolio development. In particular, women should also be taught the art of salary negotiation, especially when entering their first professional position. While salary negotiation is becoming more common practice for women, in 2019, just a few years ago, 58% of women in all industries took the first salary that was offered to them without any negotiation. The wage gap starts early and it follows women into their careers and into retirement. On average right now, women who retire only have 70% of the retirement income that their male peers do. If educators can empower women to ask for what they are worth by incorporating salary negotiations into professional practices, professional development courses, portfolio courses, they can help close this wage gap for women designers. Women really are slowly taking over the design field. In 2012, 3% of creative directors are women, and today, just 10 years later, the number's grown to 29%. But universities need to make sure the education that they are providing is reflective the contributions women have made to our past and that they're currently making in order to inspire this future generation of graphic designers. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Jen, and thanks for sharing such interesting statistics that are quite shocking. And I'm sure that will spark a lot of debate later. Our next speaker is Sofia Fernandez, Research Associate in the Industrial Design Program at the University of Applied Sciences in Berlin, where she teaches undergraduate and graduate courses. And Sofia's paper tonight will look at gender studies in university design programs in Germany.
Yes, hello everyone. Yes, as I mentioned before in the chat, I feel like my talk became a bit obsolete now. Sorry, I have some echo here. I have to, sorry. Now it's better. Yeah, because I feel like I teach with the same mindset like Bree, Lisa, and Dina. Yeah, but in a different field and yeah, a different course, not design history, but gender studies. So today I want to talk about yeah, gender studies in university design programs in Germany, specifically using the example of the University of Applied Science in Berlin. It's called the HTW, where I work as a research associate and lecturer in the study program of industrial design. To give you a brief overview, across Germany, there are approximately 30 undergraduate courses in product or industrial design, of which only one has a fixed module focusing on gender as a regular part of their curriculum, which is in Cologne, Köln International School of Design. So yeah, being an alumni of the school and also a passionate feminist, I was motivated to change the situation for my university where I work and to bring gender studies into the study program, yeah, of the university in Berlin. And so I transformed one of my courses entitled Design Discourse to a course on gender and diversity in design. So today I want to use the opportunity to share the concept and the course syllabus, as well as some students' examples of the course results, yeah, with you, and I'm looking forward to the exchange afterwards. So you can put on the, sorry, the next slide. Yeah, thanks. So the course I will present to you was designed for fourth semester Bachelor Industrial Design students and took place 3 hours every 2 weeks, and it was online via Zoom because of the pandemic. The course had 2 main characteristics. Firstly, it was very important to me to give the students an overview of the field. So on the slide, you can see the different subtopics and fields of study we looked at throughout the course. Every session had a different focus, for example, gender and mobility, gender and the city, or gender and consumer culture. This way, students learned that gender is not an isolated topic to study and not a hermetic field, but is linked to a social and cultural context, which can be very different from each other. And yes, secondly, each session was designed to evoke a high level of student participation. This was very important to me as I'm also work as a design practitioner, and I created a lot of hands-on exercises, which always is a challenge, but yeah, this was really important to me. And so with this, I tried to raise the students' awareness of the topic and link gender with their students' own personal experience instead of simply presenting facts they might forget later on. So in these exercises, the students had to precisely observe their daily activities and surroundings and consider in what ways gender was being done and being constructed. The students documented all their results and their thought process in a logbook. In the next 2 slides, I want to share some anonymized examples from these logbooks. So you can put the next slide, please. Thanks. Yeah, so one exercise circled around the topic of gender in the city. And we discussed the more general question in the session. We discussed the more general question, who does the city belong to? We approached this big question through an exercise entitled How Gender Fair is Your Neighborhood? So we broke it down a little bit. The exercise was a kind of field study of the students' neighborhoods. I invited them to become researchers and sketch a map of their housing block, collecting the elements that shape this urban space, like shops, streets, public transportation, housing, public toilets, parks. At this point, they should not yet consider gender at all. But then in a second step, they were invited to revisit their map, this time putting on their gender glasses and critically analyze the accessibility, the functionality, the narratives, the aesthetics of the different elements they find in this neighborhood. So you can see on the slide some results. It's a summary of just different excerpts from the logbooks. In the middle, you can see a self-drawn map as well as photos of strongly gendered elements that caught the students' attention. On the left side, you see examples of public advertising. Some of them show half-naked women in order to advertise their products or services for male audience. One student commented it with handwriting, sex sales only applies in one direction. On the bottom of the slide, there are some images of dark streets and tunnels, which both increase the risk of sexual harassment and violence against women, as well as limiting their perception of security and therefore their radius of mobility. On the right side, there are some typical street signs, German ones. The green and white one on the upper right corner, for example, signifies a meeting point, but it seems to be for men exclusively, like the pictogram suggests. The same applies to the pictogram signifying family areas. And here the question of graphic design, or how we as designers deal with this question of representation, would come next. Yeah. And another controversial element of urban space identified by the students are also street names. They represent important figures of our cultural history and shape our cultural identity, but less than 10% of streets are named after a woman in Berlin. So in this next slide, I want to share another example with you, another exercise. And this deals with mobility, with the topic of mobility and transportation. In this session, the students had to undertake a more complex task. They chose a mode of mobility or transportation, for example, the car, taxi, underground train, bicycle. These are also things that industrial designers design. So it was really close to their practices. And they should analyze this object, systems with the persona method in a kind of reverse design process. They had to develop two different non-stereotypical fictitious personas and run through their user journey, documenting the results in an Instagram post. So on the slide, I hope you can read it. You can see the results of two student groups. The first one, the first row, is a series of images that problematizes the design of cars as more expensive and more insecure for women. The students identified that different genders are not treated equally by car manufacturers. The seats as well as security features such as airbags and belts are optimized for male bodies. The second example here criticized the BVG, which is the public transportation company in Berlin. For vulnerable people and families, the system is often either too dangerous, inaccessible, or inflexible. In this Instagram post, the student designed an anti-campaign satirizing the BVG's original campaign slogan that's yeah, the advertising is because we love, and it becomes because we are afraid. So these simple exercises raised many important questions that are essential for designers, I believe, if they are to be truly inclusive in their practice. Some students were skeptical at the beginning of the course, doubting whether gender is really meaningful or important for them as designers. We heard something like that, I think, before as well. However, after the first exercises, nearly all of the students realized the importance of gender as a parameter of design. In my course, students were hearing gender in the context of design for the first time, some of them. In other design programs in Germany, it is a similar story. Although some institutions are starting to offer one-off courses in gender and design, these remain exceptions. It is up to individual lecturers to bring gender into design programs. So there's a long way to go for me and my colleagues to make gender a fertile area of design education. That said, my vision is that gender and design should be an inherent part of design practice with its own design methods and tools, and that it should not be seen as a special area, nor a supplementary analytical or theoretical or critical category only, like a garnish on a plate, but rather the plate itself. As a consequence, good design has to include gender fair design, in the same way that it includes also sustainable design or transformation design. Gender therefore has to be a part of the core industrial design curriculum. In an ideal future, the word gender design will be hopefully redundant because we will understand that design is always linked to gender, since gender is a social construction and design is one of the building blocks of our social world. Design shapes our everyday experiences that, among many other things, let us become the gendered beings that we are. Every design is therefore a gendered one, or let's say, co-constructor of our gendered identities. And therefore, as a logical consequence, teaching design means, of course, considering the category of gender.
Thank you so much, Sofia. Our next speaker is Deepika Srivastava. Deepika currently works in India, so we thank her so much for taking the time to be part of this series, despite the time difference. And she works there at the National Institute of Design and also volunteers with the charity Open-Ended Design. Her paper tonight evaluates the role of gender in influencing the operations of female-led contemporary architectural practices in India. So I'll pass over to you.
Hi everyone, thank you for the opportunity. It's a great honor to be here. So this paper, it comes from my thesis at the MA History of Design program at the Royal College of Art and the Victoria and Albert Museum. What inspired me to write this was my observation in my undergraduate studies in interior architecture in India and sort of my anger with the media representation of the star architect when like I always felt that, and it's a fact that architectural production is a collaborative and a very social process. So I wondered if there could be a way to, like write this and like what we could do. So I sort of started on my wrote this. In my dissertation is originally titled "Reassessing Architectural Practice in Post-Liberalized India: Case of Mumbai-Based SJK Architects," and explores a way to understand how the dynamics of gender play out in the day-to-day operations of women-led architecture practices in India and its relation to the changes that occurred in India after economic liberalization in 1991. My primary resources were magazines and and media publications, two accounts on women architects in India, and I also did an interview with two design directors of the practice. Since I wrote it during the COVID pandemic, I couldn't personally visit them. So yeah, next slide, please. Thank you. So SJK Architects is a Mumbai-based studio practice founded by Shimul, Jhaveri, Kadri in 1990. In the same year, India was at the cusp of a major economic change with the opening up of the markets after following a socialist model of development for nearly 40 years post-independence. This led to an increase in foreign and private investments, which allowed Indian businesses to cross borders and businesses from abroad to come to India. This also meant the rise of entrepreneurs, many of them being women as well. Among such women entrepreneurs is Shimul Jhaveri Kadri. Today, SJK Architects is one of the most well-known architectural practices in India. It has also been widely profiled by both the professional and popular media. Though women architects in India are now beginning to be recognized and have a diverse portfolio ranging from institutions, corporate offices to conservation projects, SJK Architects is still one of the few women-led practices to have received international recognition. This is a major shift from about 40 years ago when its founder was in her undergraduate days, and she recalls that she heard just the name of one female architect when talking about large scale and public architecture. Next slide, please. So SJK Architects is set up as a typical mid-sized studio architecture practice with about 20 people. The principal architect and the design directors are the main decision makers, who are supported by the senior architects and the junior architects, interior designers, technical staff, and interns. The organizational structure of SJK Architects, it reflects the apprenticeship model followed by several mid-sized architecture studios in India, wherein the accountability lies with the principal architect, in this case, Jhaveri Kadri. The firm's clients include entrepreneurs, local government institutions, and established brands. They also have a wide network of external collaborators. And for the firm, this collaboration is crucial to design and execution. So how did gender come into play? So when setting up SJK Architects, it inadvertently became a way to do things differently. And this emerged through two of Jhaveri Kadri's choices. First was from her choice to not take residential interior decoration projects, quote unquote decoration, when she began her practice in a home office in fear of being stereotyped. This is because architecture practice in India, especially for women practitioners, even today, is often stereotyped as residential innovation or interior decoration. This especially holds true for independent architects just starting out their practices. Second was to her choice of hiring only women for a long time, uh, because she did this because she worked out of her bedroom, and initially she worked out of her bedroom and felt more comfortable having them in her home. And she continued to hire only women even after relocating to her office in central Mumbai. It was only recently that the first male architect joined the firm, and most of the studio's employees are women, including its three design directors. This is something which we saw in the previous picture as well. So, in terms of, I missed saying this before, but when I was doing my dissertation, I actually mapped out SJK Architects in terms of situating it within the practices, within architecture practice in India, and what its networks are. So I also looked at, in looking at networks, I looked at who are the contractors that they are working with, and that revealed an interesting observation. So generally, like, contractors are hired through the process of tendering, and like firms work with the same contractors, but in this case they have a separate set of contractors for each project, and they hire them through the process of tendering. So this is not like the usual approach where the lowest bidder gets the contract. And the design directors mentioned in the interview that they choose their contractors on the basis of their understanding and attitudes towards the project. While it is not clear if gender plays a role here, but this is a unique and empathetic way of working. Next slide, please. Despite the challenges posed by gender in setting up the practice, the studio has had an advantage due to its location in a well-connected neighborhood of Mumbai. The city is a center for art, culture, and architecture, and is India's financial capital. It is also the birthplace of the modern architectural profession in India. And the aspect of location intersects with the question of gender because it makes available more mainstream opportunities and allows a practitioner to have a stronger network in proximity. This is also reflected through the network of SJK Architects clients, most of whom are based in Mumbai, the education of its employees in the institutions of Mumbai, and the presence of major media houses in the city, many of whom have profiled the practice. Another factor which worked out well for SJK Architects is the collaboration with two of their women clients, who are also entrepreneurs and found success with India's economic liberalization. One of them is Sunita Namjoshi, who is the founder of the textile business Synergy Lifestyle. So actually came to Kadri to build her office due to a bad experience with a male architect who refused to listen to her. Namjoshi is one of the early clients of the studio, and they've done over a dozen projects with them now. So there's a very interesting project here. The second image, it's a factory in a small town in India, and it's basically a work. This is where, as part of a textile business, the products are packaged and shipped. So due to the design intervention, the client wanted the client's brief to the to SJK Architects was to make a space which is comfortable to the workers, and they managed to do that, and it actually increased the production twofold. And what emerges, like in discussing, and there's another collaboration with Sneha I, who's the founder of an ad agency, um, Nirvana Films, and she also gave a very qualitative brief of wanting the architects to experiment. And like for example, like one instance which shows her openness is that she was willing to compromise a bit on security because she wanted the space to be open and to be a community center in the evening. And in discussing these collaborations, what emerged is a sense of collaboration, like connectedness and experimentation. What also emerges is a sense of peer-to-peer support because in case of Namjoshi and Jhaveri Kadri, they began their businesses at a similar time, and research also shows that this peer-to-peer support is very important in facilitating the success of women entrepreneurs. So what resonated throughout, like in the process of writing, is that SJK Architects' approach to the question of gender was based more on humanism than feminism. This I'm still like trying to articulate better, but also that it is rooted in its implementation in day-to-day operations, and it is also reflective of the founder Jhaveri Kadri's own belief. And often discussions on gender and design center on declining numbers of women on the field despite the high numbers of enrollment. Other discussions I found are focused on a more biographical approach of women architects. But this paper, this particular project, by focusing on this aspect of practice and networks in architecture practice, it highlights how gender responds to operational conditions of practice, design process, and architect-client relations. And maybe it's a new way to it could be a new way to discuss architecture practice, one which reflects its inherent collaboration. Thank you.
Thank you, Deepika. Our last speaker tonight is Yarden Levy, who is a fashion researcher based in Tel Aviv in Israel and a visiting lecturer at the Tel Aviv University for Youth. Yarden's paper this evening looks at the gendering of designers, and following this paper, we will again have a Q&A, so please do keep your comments and questions coming into the chat box.
Hi, thank you for the introduction. It's a great pleasure to be here. So today I'd like to present my VNA/RCA History of Design MA dissertation, Designing Designers, Educating Fashion Designers Through Gender Stereotypes. My research explores women's peculiar status in the fashion industry, being the majority but treated as a minority. I examined the fashion design educational process as the space where designers were formed and made, and how this process tracked them through fashion's gendered stereotypes. I used Shankar College of Engineering, Design and Arts Department of Fashion in Israel as a case study and examined the past decade, 2010 to 2020. This is the department I graduated from. Can I have my first slide, please? My research commenced with the 2016 National Union of Israeli Students campaign with female comedian Tom Yahl, who played student union representatives from different universities and colleges nationwide, representing each institution's stereotypical student. Shankar College was one of the institutions represented in this campaign. Yahl played Micha, a fashion design student. Micha is a gay man speaking in queer Hebrew slang. He is tired, bitter, and throws pungent remarks at his fellow students, which are all, of course, women. For example, in this scene, he tells them, "Girls, stop arriving here on the bicycles or start showering before coming here." Shankar's Department of Fashion has a riveting majority of women students, usually between 90 to 95%. However, somehow the stereotypical student is a man. This representation is not unusual for the global fashion industry as well. Even though women are the majority of fashion industry workers, they are still underrepresented in managerial roles. Many writers who wrote about fashion designers have acknowledged there are common stereotypes about them. These stereotypes, drifting from fantasy to reality, carry gender meanings, context, and histories. Through my research, I analyzed designers as the designed objects of their professionalization and the system they are designed in as a design object. This view follows the history of design approaches by design historians like Cheryl Buckley, Judy Atfield, and John A. Walker. This history of design approach can demystify fashion designers' gender ideals and stereotypes, as these are merely elements of design that can be shifted, removed, or added. The three most prominent stereotypes I identified are artistic freedom, absolute dedication to the work, and the designer as a sole creator of fashion. These three umbrella stereotypes cover many other gender divisions, partitions, and ideals about fashion designers' work, such as the division between production and design, the partition between fashion and clothes, the ideal fashion designer as purely devoted to their jobs. I want to note that I contextualized these three stereotypes in an Israeli context. For example, this image on the right is from an Israeli brand called Adish. Adish is a high-end menswear brand sold mostly internationally. They design the clothes in Tel Aviv and Palestinian women, some working from refugee camps in the Israeli occupied territories of Palestine, embroider them. A whole research can cover this brand and other collaborative initiatives alike. However, in the context of this research, the focus is that the designers both identify as men. The designing free entity sells hoodies for 900 shekels, around 200 pounds, when the producer entity works from a refugee camp. This is a case where artistic freedom is given to one side by mechanisms of oppression and of male entrepreneurship thriving from female labor. Can I have the next slide, please? A significant amount of primary sources I used for this research was generously shared with me by Shankar. One of the things I examined is the design and structure of the schedule and curriculum. The fashion design course at Shankar is a four-year course. Students study technical production skills such as pattern making, draping, sewing, and illustration, design processes, and cultural studies during these 4 years. The most significant conclusion from examining this schedule design is the dedication level expected from the students. As you can see on the left, the first year has 40 academic hours per week, 2 hours less than the standard for a full-time job in Israel. On top of that, most modules require self-directed work at home or school, depending on the equipment students have at home. Even though the schedule becomes less and less intense over the 4 years, the design tasks embarked on the students become more and more time-consuming in school after hours. The complete dedication expected from the students is gendered primarily because it interferes with personal life and unpaid labor like caregiving. According to Caroline Quevedo Perez, 75% of unpaid work is globally undertaken by women, including caregiving. Hence, personal life ideals are different for men and women internationally and mainly in a family-oriented culture like Israel. You can see it exemplified in the graphs on the right. Although students are not always in the part of their lives where they also act as caregivers, the schedule educates them that to be a good designer, they need to work around the clock. Can I have the next slide, please? The primary sources also suggest that the department has one clear work process. It is taught in the first year and carried on in most fashion projects students take. This table on the right, gathered from the 2011 to 2020 schedules collected for this research, shows all the fashion design projects students could choose from between the years. Most of the fashion design projects on the table have a similar work process. The standard process in years 1 to 3 begins with inspiration research. The inspiration research is usually spread over weeks 1 to 3 of the semester. In weeks 4 to 7, students conduct material and textile research, fabric manipulation testing, and sketching. Then students produce the look they designed on weeks 8 to 14. What is absent from this process and is a crucial part in design is the consumer. This work process has gender implications as well, as it promotes stereotypes of fashion design of the fashion designer as a sole creator. As students serve all the roles of the design process, they are the consumers, designers, and producers of their design. As to writers like Atfield, Buckley, and Walker, the perception of the designer as the center of the design process is gendered. According to Alison Stokes, disregarding the consumer is gendered as well, as it promotes ideas of autonomy and artistic freedom, which are usually saved to men designers. As my research deals with gender, which is often an invisible construct of systems, and its implications can sometimes only be detected by analyzing personal experiences, I also conducted interviews with staff members and students. The staff members illustrate an incomplete picture of the ideal student. The most recurring adjective they used to describe students was curious. 4 out of 5 interviewees used it. 3 interviewees mentioned talented, where talent was noted twice as a given trait. Most of the adjectives to describe the ideal student were not mentioned by more than one interviewee. When I interviewed the previous head of department, she implied that the ideal graduate is one who works outside of Israel, meaning they have to abandon their social life in their home country, favoring their career, which is highly dedicated. Interestingly, all the interviewees separated between the desirable traits of a fashion design student and the desirable traits for a fashion designer. For example, one tutor said, quote, I do not think that a good student is necessarily a talented student or a good designer, end quote. The students had a clear image of the ideal student. They noted that the ideal student is fully dedicated to fashion and their studies, and the studies that are very demanding. Second, he is a man. Third, he has the means to buy luxurious materials. Though these conclusions were drawn from the student interviews, none of the students identified with all of them. Compared with the staff members' answers, there is minimal overlap between the department's ideal student and the student's ideal designer's perception. Also, it seems that the students do not resonate with the work process that they study and the disregard of the consumer. So, what kind of designer do these ideals design? Do they even design a designer, or do they design a fashion design student rather than a fashion designer? This research found that the curriculum and teaching are affected by these stereotypes. These stereotypes did not match the gender most students in the department identify with. This research opens a new debate in local fashion studies. It can be widened by further research into other fashion design departments, other fashion design training modes, and mostly intersectionality in fashion design studies in Israel. Broader and further research on these topics can strengthen the local industry and make fashion designers and workers' life better. Thank you.